All right, guys, welcome back. And I got a great guest coming up here in a minute. We're going to be speaking with Sheila Bender. Now, Sheila Bender is a best-selling author, a poet, and she founded Writing It Real. And that's also the website, writingitreal.com. And Writing It Real, I think it was founded at like 20 years ago, I think. It was a site for instruction to facilitate writing from personal experience. And Sheila's got a bunch of books out, and one was out, and now it's surging again. It's doing really well again. There are instructional books. Writing personal essays. I'm going to get Sheila up here, but just make sure that you guys know that we're live. If you'd like, you can ask Sheila a question, 631-205-6568, or you could use that instant feedback on the chat, and I'll ask Sheila your question for you. So you get your question answered by an expert, and you can be part of the show. Just give me your name, where you're from, and if you're bashful, it's fine, right? Anonymous. All right, guys, with no further ado, it is my honor and privilege to welcome Sheila Bender to the program. Hey, Sheila.
Hey, thank you very much. I'm really happy to be talking about my favorite subject, which is writing.
Were you always since you can remember? Were you journaling diaries? I mean, just way back.
Sure I was. And then I had the energy to ask my seventh grade social studies teacher if I could write my reports in ballad form. And I was always doing things like that, writing letters. I did have a diary at times, but then let's in quotes, real life intruded. Right. I had to take a lot of science majors. I had to do all these requirements. And I decided that if I was supposed to be a writer, God would tap me on the shoulder and tell me, and that's not what happened. But after I had my first child, my daughter was a baby, I felt very tapped on the shoulder to be who I really was, who was a poet. And that's when I began in my early 30s my late 20s, to really take writing seriously and study with poets and other writers. And it's been no stopping me since then.
So what was the first project that you put out?
Okay, interesting. Of course, as a poet, you publish poems one by one in different publications. And I'd been invited to a particular Meet the Author event for school librarians to come. And I had the good fortune of sitting next to a fiction writer, a young adult fiction writer named, at the time, Christy Colleen. She's now Christy Glover. And we liked each other. So we decided to write each other letters about our writing process. And we found ourselves an agent, and she found us a Warner editor who liked the book but wanted us to add more in terms of instruction, not just our letters. So that came out in, I think, the 80s, and it was a success, and we loved doing it. And then I just kept finding ways to write about writing, but also eventually to publish books of my own writing, memoir, poetry, instructional books.
Nice. And I've heard, I don't know if it's true, but I've heard that poetry is the hardest of the techniques, I guess you would call it, to really put out there. Is it hard to get that published poetry? Is that true, or is that just something I've heard?
Okay. There's all kinds of ways we can hear what you mean about hard. People are, I think, afraid of poetry. Mm-hmm. I go to the post office now to mail books of poetry, and I'm always asked those questions. Do you have anything dangerous? They mean something flammable in your envelope. And I say, yeah, I have a book of poetry in here. That's dangerous. And that's why people think it's hard, because they have feelings, and they don't necessarily know what to do with the feelings they have. And so writing poetry can be something people back away from. But because of U.S. poet laureates popularizing poetry, because of inaugurations in which poets have read, because of the newest one with President Biden, the young woman who wrote the poem that was featured then got lots of press. So I think, and there are many, many, especially because of online, many, many venues seeking poetry. However, it's hard to write a good poem. It takes concentration to write short. It takes concentration to think of the sound. And it takes a kind of willingness to be courageous because you actually don't know what your poem is going to be telling you. And so I think it's both true that it's certainly true that it's hard to find an audience sometimes for poetry and it's hard to write it. But once you find peers to work with, then it's not hard anymore. You have a tribe. You have people who enjoy work in progress and listening to your work as it's developing and helping you grow it. So the other thing I think, though, is that honestly, we're all poets, but it's kind of trained out of us. And an example that I always like to give is one I heard from another poet, James Mitsui. He tells this little story about a little girl saying to her dad, "Daddy, Daddy, there's a fingernail in the sky." And he says, "Don't be silly, that's the moon." And I think that's what poets face, or any poetry part of us face, sounding perhaps silly when we're not. So yes and no is my answer to your question.
Gotcha. Well, thank you for that. Well said. Now, before I get into the books that you have out right now, and I know one's made a big resurgence. But before I get there, can you tell the audience a little bit about Writing It Real?
Of course. You were right. It was founded in 2002. It was actually in its inception the result of losing my son. He was 25 and he died in a snowboarding accident. And I figured out that the way to honor him and therefore his life was to do my best thing. He was always doing his best thing, which was architecture, and his friendships. And he had a fiance, and he was a person who really lived his life. So I decided my best thing was writing and teaching others to write. And my husband was in the computing field, and I said, I wonder if I could launch a website. I'd already written a number of instructional books, but they take a long time. To write and to get to market, get accepted for publication, get produced, get to market. So he said, of course you can. And we did it. And so he's always been my partner in it. And we launched it in 2002. The internet was not what it is today. So the site was weekly articles that I wrote. So I didn't have to write a whole book in order to get my work out to people who needed it. But then in about 2004, things were getting pretty different. So I made email lists and did online instruction. And now this site has a lot going on in it. I hope people will visit. There's a whole archive of articles. I put out a newsletter every week that has references to other people's articles of interest around the internet. I teach through it. And it's a lively place. So, and I, of course, have information about my books on the site as well.
Gotcha. And now, who would be the best candidate to go on Writing It Real and becoming involved with it?
Okay. Well, anyone who writes I call it anyone who writes from personal experience. My motto is, when you're working with work in progress, and that means drafting it and redrafting it and sharing it, there is no such thing as bad writing, only the opportunity for good writing. So through my classes and through what I share in articles, which are now once a month, I believe that. And I share my way of learning how to grow writing, because that's what was missing for me. That's what took me so long after my 7th grade ballads. What took me so long was the kind of critical response you get, especially in college, or at least when I went to college. And it's all about critiquing, which in its root means to tear apart. And I don't want to tear apart anyone's writing. I want to help them see the opportunity so they can grow it. And one of my images for that is the lima bean experiment from grade school. If you had it, you might remember that we were, as early grade schoolers, given lima beans, and we were given a paper towel and some water and told to put our lima beans in the paper towel and a few days later to see if it sprouted. And then as it grew, the first leaves of any plant are what we call the cotyledons. I was almost a biology major, but I majored in English. Anyway, the cotyledons, which do not look like the signature leaf of the plant. They're very round and they hold the next set of nutrition. And that's what I feel about writing. It's like first drafts may be full of cotyledons. You've got to find the nutrition in them for your writing so that you can grow the plant. And when you've got the right stuff happening, those cotyledons just die and fall away, just like in nature. So there's no need to critique and tear apart. There's only a need for growing writing and trusting the writer and trusting that having honest response, usually in the form of I statements. I am confused. I got lost here, as opposed to what I was told by teachers, too wordy, incoherent, and that didn't help me. But someone says I'm confused. All right, I can fix that. So anyone starting, continuing, experienced, I've worked with so many people, and most of my students begin publishing. And sometimes I make poets out of people who don't think they could have been.
Wow, well said. What great examples. Make it very vivid. Now tell me. Well, that's what you do.
Yeah, right.
Right, you're a professional at that. So, what? Tell me about some of the books that you have out right now.
I would love to. I'll start at the beginning with that one that got an agent. It became called Writing in a Convertible with the Top Down. And it's meant to say, you can do it. You know, we don't say writing's like so easy. You just have to put your foot on the pedal, but we do say you can do it. And beginning isn't as hard as you think. So that one's still around. I republished it under Writing It Real. It's long out of print from Warner, but it's updated by my co-writer and myself. And then my second book was about writing personal essays because I was told when I was studying with a famous poet, David Wagner, he told our whole class that when you're a poet, you must also learn to write in another genre because sometimes the poems won't come. I think it's more like sometimes the work you want to explore requires sentences and not line breaks and more words. So that book is now called Writing Personal Essays, Shaping and Sharing Your Life Experiences. And that's the one that's had a new surge. I think the people are interested in the personal essay. People are interested in making contact with people outside of their own hearts and minds with an exploration. An essay is an exploration. It isn't an answer. It's an exploration of experience. And I'm very fond of that book. It was first published by Writer's Digest Books in the 90s. And I love what that book has in it. It has examples. It has my responses to people's drafts. It has a lot of information about how to use rhetorical forms that we're familiar with, like comparison, contrast, and how to, and narration, and description, and argument, persuasion, things like that.
Right.
To kind of lean on the structure in order to cultivate your way of talking about your experience and coming to some discovery. So I think it's Robert Frost who said, what he really said is no tears in the writer, no tears in the reader. But he's often quoted as having said, no discovery in the writer, no discovery in the reader. And the way I put that together is we often cry when we've discovered the truth.
Yeah.
So that's that book. And then I continue to write books. One is called Creative Writing Demystified. I've written a book called Writing College Essays. And all of this always uses my way of growing writing. And so that's some of them. There are more. More. And so some.
Now, taking, for instance, the one about what's it with the writing with the top off?
The convertible with the top down.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to ask authors because I understand that your process takes a series of rewriting and revision and editing, and it's a very involved process, and usually you want to tell something or show something or ask questions, but so a lot of the time it's the author that learns something about themselves. Did anything with you change after that book?
I change after every book.
Really?
Yeah, and I change after every poem. I mean, I'm still me. It's not like I'm unrecognizable.
Right, yeah.
But there's something different in the way I can view the world, relationships, moments, because especially ones that are disturbing and distressing, because then they don't just circulate around inside of me. They have a home, which is in the piece of writing. But I always, absolutely, I don't know that it's interesting to write unless you're writing towards discovery. But we get there through images and details. We don't get there just by summarizing and leaping to a conclusion. It's always a process of evocation, of experience, so that when it's like a two-way mirror, when you really have the images doing the work for you and someone outside of your heart and mind gets it, lives it, then you do too in a whole new way. So that's my best way of explaining that.
Thank you. And I hope I'm not being too personal here, but as a writer, when you lost Seth, how did that affect your writing? Was it helpful, the writing, or were you able to?
Yes, but not right away. But pretty quickly. The only thing I felt like doing, I stopped teaching for a while, and I had an editing job that I couldn't focus on. But I would get up and look at the sunset, and I would at the sunrise, and then later I would look at the sunset. I would talk to people. I mean, sometimes the best people to talk to were people I would never see again. Like I was walking by an antique shop and I saw a lighting fixture, and it reminded me of a time that my son had been tasked with buying us one on a very tight budget and had succeeded in finding something and hanging it for us. And I said, I have to have this because I'll look at it every day, and I wasn't living in the same place anymore. I'll look at it every day and I'll think of him. So the proprietor of the antique shop, which was only a couple blocks from my house, said that he would install it later when he closed the shop. Wow. And I said, okay. And he came and he did it. And of course I told him the story of Seth. Wow. And so there would be these times, but then I did start writing poetry because I was reading everything I could read by stories by parents who had lost children, young children and grown children. And it moved me. It was all I wanted to read, really. I wanted to share their experience. Right. Because I had my own. And then I started writing poems, and then I started writing essays, and I didn't know what I was doing, but I went back to my writing group and they said, you have a book here. And I said, I might have a book here, but who would want to read it? It's so sad. And they said, well, can I show what we have so far to my sister? She lost a child, and, they would want me to share it. So then some of it started getting printed in Publications, literary magazines. And then this is the memoir. It's called Since Then. That's my newest book, which I want to talk about. The memoir is called A New Theology, Turning to Poetry in a Time of Grief. And it's not a book of poems, but my poems are in there, as are poems that inspired me. And I realized that I could do something good with this book, which was raise money for a place in my town, Port Townsend, a marine science center that my son had written about for his master's thesis in architecture. And I wanted to do it for them. And so I took all those essays, I took those poems, I made a memoir. Wow. And it helped me. Of course it helped me because I could revisit my experience a few years after, and resurrect my son. That's what I realized I had done in that book, in that memoir. People would say, I didn't know your son, but I do now. Wow. And I realized that's the best I could do, isn't it? Yeah. To have still here. But then over the years, and still, of course, like everybody who's grieving, dealing with it and coming out some shoot where you're able to honor both the life of the beloved and your own life, and live each moment more fully. So my newest book is called Since Then, Poems and Short Prose. And it begins with the loss, and it retrieves him again and again through letters that I write to him, through poems of memory, through my own journey of how do you grieve? I mean, it's with you every moment, but how do you articulate that? And it comes out the other side. It starts early on in the book. There's a poem called Who Lives on the Other Side? And it's very specific. I'm on a walk looking across a pond at a house, a single house. And I'm wondering what will happen if someone opened that door, which is, of course, metaphorical.
Of course.
And I found it. And it's not a very long poem. Do we have time for me to read it?
I'd love to hear that.
Okay. This is the ending of the book. It's called Now, to Seth on his birthday, October 1st, 2019. I read time now like a book, front to back or back to front, midsection first or by random pages. Changing it up spins your life longer somehow. And though I know the ending can never be rewritten, I savor who you were and who you will always be. Write catching ups and checking ins to create more love for me, to feel in the only present possible. So in this season come round again, in the rush of fall wind and thickening clouds of winter, I can still imagine son and a wife and children paddling with you along the shores of Discovery Bay, gleaming wood of the kayaks visible as they move farther and farther from where I stand, holding them dear, even as I must let them go.
Oh, man. Wow, that's powerful.
Thank you. And, that power that poetry can give us is so important to healing. It's so important.
That was really great work. Thank you for that. Thank you for sharing that. That was outstanding.
Thank you.
I love the image at the end of you kind of watching the boat.
Yeah, and it's a very personal image as well because my son did build his own kayak. He did have a dream of having the woman he was going to marry and their children kayaking. So, images that are really personal can also be really universal.
Oh, wow, what a bright guy.
He was wonderful, I have to say. But of course, I was his mom.
Yeah, I got you. Wow. So now, where can people get these great books? And that's the latest one. Until then,
right? So that's the latest one. And I asked the publisher, which is in Seattle, Exophidia Press, if I could have some that I could send out to people because I could sign them. Mm-hmm. And I live about 2.5 hours from Seattle. So he said yes. So they can certainly go to Writing It Real. And on the front page is information about the book and a buy button. And I'm very happy to sign the books and mail them for the same cover price that's on the book.
Nice.
And then Writing It Real's Writing Personal Essays is quickly available from Amazon. And all my other books are also on Amazon. You can find them.
Okay. And then anybody interested in Writing It Real, best way to get a hold of you is just to go to writingitreal.com. Is there any other social media, anything that you want to mention?
I've been a little lax in posting on it, but I do have a Facebook page, Facebook.com/Writing It Real. I have a page about grief, which is named after my memoir. So it's Facebook.com/A New Theology. And I just started sharing articles on Medium, but I mean, just last weekend posted my first one, but people can find me on Medium and I plan to be posting more, but they can also email me directly. I hope I can say this clearly on the phone. S, like my name, Bender, Bender, at writingitreal.com.
All right. Beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing and for doing just a great job here. Let me give you the last couple seconds here. Anything you want the audience to think about or to ponder or leave us with? Really interesting stuff. Thank you.
Just that if you think you have a book in you or an article or a letter to the editor or an opinion piece, you do. You wouldn't think it if you didn't have it. So it's a matter of sitting down and writing it. And then if you need to learn more about the craft, to find that. You can find it by reading other people's writing. You can find it in books like mine. You can find it in classes, but don't let anybody tell you you cannot do it. I have worked with a lot of resurrected writers, people who were crushed in college, kind of like I was with the wording, this is too wordy, this is incoherent.
Right.
We don't need that. We need people who will nurture our writing. And there are many ways to do it. And I know that I do it at Writing It Real, but the most important thing is if it's occurring to you, it's because you can. And if you want to, you can.
Love it. Great message. Great guest. Thank you, Sheila Bender. And guys, we'll be right back. Stay there. Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
Of course my kid's in the right car seat. Well, I think he is.
Yeah, my kid's in a booster seat. He was ready to move up. He is ready, right?
Her car seat looks like the right size.
There are probably rules on when to move up to a booster seat, aren't there?
Rear facing, forward facing. I think I have it right.
Car crashes are a leading killer of children 1 to 13. Are your children in the right car seat for their age and size? Don't think you know. Know you know. Go to safercar.gov/the right seat.
I know my child's in the right car seat, or else I wouldn't get in the driver's seat.
Brought to you by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the Ad Council.